Time and time again, Vladimir Putin's troops make the same mistake. They take a piece of Ukrainian territory. Then, they set up fortifications and command posts. So far, so good. But the mistake comes from the fact that those Russian soldiers seem to think they're safe once they've taken that territory. They never are. Ukraine always strikes back. And that's exactly what it's just done in the contested Zaporizhzhia Oblast. Ukraine strapped US GBU-62 bombs onto a Soviet-era MiG-29. What happened next was brutal, the complete disintegration of a Russian command post. On August 6th, United 24 Media was among the first media outlets to report on Ukraine's daring raid on Russian-occupied territory. It offered the basics. At some point during the previous day, Ukraine sent one of its MiG-29 fighter jets into the skies over Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia. That jet was loaded with GBU-62 precision bombs, which the aircraft proceeded to drop. Those bombs extended the wings given to them by special US-made wing kits and were soon gliding with pinpoint precision to a Russian command post. Boom. The command post, along with all of the Russian soldiers inside, was vaporized. And this isn't an attack that Russia can deny or only suggest that happened as a result of debris landing on the post after the Ukrainian bomb was shot to pieces. It doesn't seem like any Russian air defenses were activated at all. And even if they had been, Russia wouldn't be able to deny that Ukraine's strike happened. Why? Well, there's video footage. Published to both the Sonyashnik Telegram channel and Militanyi's YouTube channel, that video is 54 seconds of proof that Ukraine pulled off precisely what Russia wishes it couldn't do. As music blares in the background, the footage starts with a view of Ukraine's MiG-29 roaring into the skies. It conducts a turn before the video switches to an overhead view of a populated area surrounded by woodland. That view, which appears to be shot by a reconnaissance drone, holds for a few seconds. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a massive explosion engulfs the scene. A fireball rises into the air, sending out plumes of smoke and debris, as what we now know to be a Russian command center is blown to smithereens. And that's the perfect description for it. The video feed cuts to what must be several minutes after the GBU-62 exploded. The smoke has cleared, and all that remains is an enormous crater in the ground where a building once stood. Ukraine's drone zooms in to show the extent of the damage. There is no movement, no attempted escape by Russian soldiers. Nobody made it out of the command post alive. The Sonyashnik Telegram channel was more than a little insulting toward Putin's dead soldiers when reporting on the strike. Not that it doesn't have the right to be after the atrocities Russia has committed in Ukraine. Our Cossacks had a great time in the south. The company's leadership and headquarters left this land forever, the channel exclaimed. They got screwed, occupied someone's house, and died. Well, they're scum, not people. A dehumanizing statement perhaps, but one that shows the low regard Ukraine holds for Putin's invaders. The channel's report ended with the statement that Putin will have to take seriously. Nothing. Soon your electronic warfare system will not save you from heavenly punishment. There are things that are beyond your control. Things like Ukraine using a Soviet-era fighter jet to decimate a Russian command post with a US-made bomb. More details about what Ukraine just hit come from United 24. It says that the destroyed building was both a command post that had been overseeing recent Russian assaults in Zaporizhzhia, as well as a personnel gathering point. It's unknown how many Russian soldiers were in the building at the time of Ukraine's strike. At the very least, the strike will have likely taken out some form of Russian military commander, such as an officer or soldiers of a similar rank. But if Ukraine managed to time the strike well, it may have destroyed an entire unit of soldiers that were preparing to launch a new ground raid. Thanks to the War Archive Telegram channel, we also know that the specific village where this command post was located is called Kamyanska. It's likely one of the many settlements in Zaporizhzhia that Putin's forces have managed to overrun. After all, the oblast was one of Russia's first targets when Putin launched his full-scale invasion back in February 2022. That initial assault led to the capture of the oblast's nuclear power plant. We'll get into that later in the video. However, Russia's troops have not managed to take the city that shares its name with the oblast, and they've been pushing to do so for over 3 years. Villages like Kamyanska are being used as launching pads for Russia's ground assaults. Now that particular settlement has been turned into a non-factor. The destruction of a command post alone would make Ukraine's Kamyanska strike a roaring success. However, there's an extra little wrinkle to the story. Militanyi reports the Sunflower Telegram channel as revealing what that wrinkle is. The enemy again thought that they could move unnoticed in small groups, but the accumulation of invaders and equipment was noticed and promptly transferred to the aviation, it quotes the channel as saying. For much of his Ukraine invasion, Putin relied on massive units of troops and mechanized equipment to launch his assaults against Ukraine's defenses. The idea was simple enough: overwhelm the defenses with sheer numbers, and they would eventually crumble. It worked to an extent. Russia's problem was that Ukraine's defenses rarely fell as quickly as anticipated, with these massive assaults often leading to multi-month battles that cost Russia thousands of soldiers and pieces of equipment before they were all said and done. Large deployments make for easy targets. Ukraine was achieving amazing results in its defense because it could hit Russia hard with drones, artillery, and any other weapon it had at its disposal. So Putin has altered his approach. In recent months, we've been seeing Russia launch constant assaults using smaller units to batter Ukraine's defenses. The BBC reported on this tactical change in a July 9th assessment of Russia's ongoing summer offensive in the east and north of Ukraine. It spoke to Lieutenant Artem Pribilnov, who was stationed near Pokrovsk with Ukraine's 155th Brigade at the time. Pribilnov has seen plenty of Russia's new form of ground strike play out. He says that Russia rarely launches massive assaults anymore because large contingents of troops are easy to detect and take out by Ukraine's drone operators. Instead, Putin is sending small groups of infantry to attack, often on foot and occasionally on motorcycles, in an attempt to get the jump on Ukraine's defenders. It's a tactic that's been dubbed a creeping offense by some, the BBC says, and it has the goal of exhausting Ukrainian resources while stretching its defenses, as Ukraine's soldiers are forced to respond to these small units when they're discovered. Russia's increased mobility is the problem here. Small groups can move undetected and unencumbered by mechanized units. While that makes them less effective as attacking forces, meaning they're often wiped out quickly once they're discovered, it also means that they can often get closer to their targets faster than would be possible with a larger offensive. RBC Ukraine offered even more details about these raids in a July 25th report that highlighted how Russia is trying to use them to take territory in Toretsk. In that city, the groups Russia deploys can be as small as 3 or 4 troops. A spokesperson of the Operational Tactical Group in Luhansk, named Lieutenant Colonel Dmytro Zaporizhzhia, explained what was happening. This tactic is characterized by the fact that these are small infantry groups of 3 or 4 people who try to reach the positions of the defense forces, possibly also to storm, and they are involved in these actions, sometimes using motor vehicles, buggies, and so on, he says. Zaporizhzhia also points out that these small groups are prone to using anything they can find to overcome Ukrainian defenses that were designed to tackle much larger units. They use ladders to overcome anti-tank ditches. Once we saw an ordinary ladder, another time they managed to bring an iron one from somewhere. And another point is that they use tree trunks, where they either screw something resembling steps in order to throw it into the anti-tank ditch and then descend on this tree trunk to the other side, he adds. By this point, you may be wondering what any of this has to do with the strike Ukraine just pulled off with its MiG-29 and GBU-62. Well, it's simple. Ukraine's problem right now is that these small groups of Russian soldiers are difficult to detect, which makes it hard for Ukraine's defenders to prepare for them. Attacks can come from all angles, forcing Ukraine into a reactive stance rather than a proactive one in its defense. There's not a huge amount Ukraine can do about the smaller units other than react to them on the field, but what it can do is take out the command posts where these smaller units receive their orders. That was the point of the August strike in Zaporizhzhia. By taking out the building where these small units of Russian soldiers gather to be deployed, Ukraine has conducted a perfect decapitation strike. The Russian soldiers will still be in Kamyanska, only now they don't have anybody telling them what to do. At worst, that means they'll continue to try to form small assault groups without leadership, making them easier to catch or even increasing the possibility that they'll stumble into Ukrainian traps due to a lack of intelligence about the territory they're trying to invade. At best, those troops won't attack at all until a new command post is set up and Russia can transport more officers to Kamyanska. That process could take days or even weeks, which relieves a ton of pressure on the Ukrainian soldiers defending the areas of Zaporizhzhia that Russia has yet to take. So the headline is the obliteration of a command post. But the result may be that Ukraine has just figured out a way to bring an end to Putin's altered strategy for taking territory. Coming back to the strike, we also need to dig deeper into the specific weapon that Ukraine used, the GBU-62. According to Designation Systems, that bomb was born from a program the US Air Force and US Navy began in 1991 to develop a low-cost and general-purpose precision-guided weapon that could be launched from practically any American fighter jet. The result of that program was the creation of the Joint Direct Attack Munition, or JDAM. You may have heard of it. The JDAM is essentially a guidance system that can be strapped to a dumb bomb to turn it into a precision-guided weapon that can be used in all weather conditions, Army Recognition says. The original batches of JDAMs achieved a 95% system reliability rate during their initial testing period during the late 90s, and were eventually rolled out to the Air Force and Navy that helped design them. The GBU-62 is a JDAM, but it's not the original JDAM that the US developed. Instead, this powerful bomb is a version of the JDAM that comes with a few extra features. Once the US had realized just how effective its new guidance kit could be, it began tweaking the design into what would later become known as the JDAM-ER, or Extended Range. That kit is strapped onto 500-pound Mark 62 dumb bombs, tripling the range of the original JDAM to 50 miles, while still allowing the bomb to be launched from a high enough altitude that the aerial platform that drops it is at minimal risk of being shot down by an enemy's air defenses. It's this extended range version of the JDAM that Ukraine used to take out the Zaporizhzhia command post. And this is far from the first time that Ukraine has proven just how effective this weapon can be. Back in March, Forbes reported that Ukraine managed to take out a field headquarters in the Kherson Oblast by sending a GBU-62 right through the bunker's door. What Russian troops thought was a safe location came crumbling down around them as the GBU-62 exploded. Fast forward to July 31st and Ukraine was at it again. Using a MiG-29 fighter jet, it used GBU-62s to devastate a drone operator's base in the Sumy region, delivering a massive blow to Putin's summer offensive in that oblast in the process. These are just a handful of examples, but they, combined with what Ukraine just pulled off in Zaporizhzhia, show us a pattern is emerging. As Putin alters his strategy on the ground, becoming more reliant on small units and drone operators in the process, Ukraine is using its GBU-62s to hit hard. Those hits aren't being made on the Russian soldiers assaulting their positions. Instead, Ukraine is taking out command posts, field headquarters, and drone operation buildings. It's a decapitation strategy, and Ukraine is using it expertly to reduce the effectiveness of Russia's soldiers on the front lines. All of this brings us nicely to what Ukraine's latest GBU-62 strike means for Russia. We've already covered one of the problems these powerful bombs are creating for Putin. He's losing vital facilities, along with the veteran soldiers stationed within them, to these bombs. With those soldiers and their command posts taken down, the rank and file among Russia's military are being left directionless. It's all about reducing pressure. A lack of organization due to no commanders means faltering assaults, which are easier for Ukraine to pick off. If Putin's goal is to use drones and small units to take territory, Ukraine's GBU-62 responses are just making that goal harder and harder to achieve. Beyond that, there's another thing that will worry Putin. How on earth is Ukraine launching GBU-62s from MiG-29s? It's an interesting question when you remember that the bombs Ukraine is using are made in the US, while the aircraft launching them are relics of the Soviet era. The GBU-62, in particular, is a variant of the JDAM-ER that only entered service in 2015. The MiG-29 was developed during the 1970s, meaning there are several decades between the aircraft and the bombs it's launching. And that's without even going into the potential compatibility issues. A MiG-29's electronics simply shouldn't be compatible with the bomb that was made for US fighter jets. But it is, and it has been for most of the Ukraine war. Back in December 2022, Defense Express published a report explaining how the US and Ukraine had worked together to transform Ukraine's Soviet-era fighter jets into aircraft capable of launching the GBU-62. It turns out that the two countries came up with a surprisingly simple and elegant solution to put a square peg in a round hole, as one New York Times journalist put it. A special pylon and equipment loaded with the software needed to guide the bomb. The US suggested that Ukraine start using the LAU-118A pylon, which is a smart pylon that provides the ability to link GBU-62s to the software needed to launch them. That idea overcame the initial compatibility issues. However, Ukraine still needed access to the software, rather than trying to tangle with the MiG-29's built-in electronics, though that is possible through the use of a laptop. Ukraine simply uses a tablet computer set inside the cockpit to launch its GBU-62s. Why configure electronic systems when you can bypass them entirely? Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia strike is the latest example of that technology in action, and with this tech, Ukraine has managed to turn an ancient aerial platform that should be ineffective against Russia's air defenses into a death-dealing machine, capable of wiping out Russian facilities thanks to its newfound ability to launch glide bombs from outside the range of Russia's air defenses. What was once old became new again, and Putin doesn't have a solution for that problem. Beyond that, Ukraine's August 6th strike matters because of what it means for Zaporizhzhia. We mentioned earlier in the video that we would come back to the nuclear power plant that Russia managed to seize during its initial invasion of this oblast. That power plant is still under Russia's control. That's good for Putin because it's a strategic asset that he may be able to use as leverage in future peace negotiations. What isn't so good for Putin is that he wants to reactivate the plant so Russia can provide its forces with power inside the regions of Zaporizhzhia that they control. That's not going to happen anytime soon. Back in April, The Guardian reported that it would likely take up to 2 years for Ukraine in peacetime to reactivate that plant. Despite this, May 29th saw AP News report that restarting the plant is still on Putin's mind and will be a topic for future discussions. Assuming Russia has some way to overcome the 2-year requirement Ukraine mentions, it still won't be able to restart the plant for a simple reason. It hasn't taken all of Zaporizhzhia. Specifically, Russia still doesn't control the city that carries the oblast's name, despite launching a bevy of aerial assaults against it. In January, Russia launched a strike on the city that killed at least 13 people and injured 32 others. On August 6th, and perhaps in response to Ukraine taking out the command post, Russia launched another strike that killed 2 people and injured 10 others, Reuters reports. These strikes wouldn't be happening if Russia's troops occupied Zaporizhzhia city, and the fact that the occupation hasn't happened yet is massive for Ukraine because it means it can bring its MiG-29s and their GBU-62s within the range of the territory Russia occupies to launch its devastating attacks. The long and short of it is simple. Russia's failure to take all of Zaporizhzhia means its occupied territories are still vulnerable. As long as that's the case, those territories will continue to be attacked, making it impossible for the nuclear power plant Russia has held for several years at this point to be reactivated. And the worst of it is still coming for Putin. In February, news broke that Ukraine had been testing a new version of the JDAM-ER that is compatible with 1,000-pound bombs. These bombs have already been used a handful of times, the aviationist says, and Ukraine itself is likely providing the dumb bombs for its new kits, rather than the US. That's massive news. Bombs that double the power of the GBU-62 can devastate any target they strike. If those bombs are being made in Ukraine, Putin will no longer have hope that Ukraine's JDAM-ER stockpiles dry up due to a lack of international aid. They'll only get larger, be able to hit harder, and there's nothing that Russia can do about it. Speaking of things that Putin can do nothing about, Ukraine just outplayed Russia so badly that it's hard to watch. Putin's newest nuclear attack submarine has been compromised, and all of the details about how it works and what it does have been leaked. Find out what those details are in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of the latest Ukrainian strikes against Russia's command posts. And thanks for watching.